Hello and welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. Before we get to our topic today, I just want to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors. Innovation has always been the key to success of Pepperball, and the Pepperball Blast is just one more way to deliver a payload that will distract, disorient, or incapacitate an inmate. This lightweight, refillable delivery system is perfect for carrying in a holster, in your pocket, or just holding in your hand as part of a cell entry team or a CERT team. Each reloadable blast cartridge contains up to 3 projectiles worth of PAVA powder. When the quick flip safety is turned and depressed, the PAVA powder is pushed out of the tube by a 1.8 gram nitrogen cartridge. This will quickly cover the inmate and saturate the cell. Since there's no actual projectiles deployed upon firing, this is a truly non-lethal product with no impact. To learn more about Pepperball, go to www.pepperball.com or click on the show notes today for more information. Pepperball is the safer option first. Well, welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. My name is Michael Cantrell. Today I have a guest, Jimmy Cummings. He's a retired Marine who spent 21 years working in corrections in the Marine Corps. He's retired as a commanding officer at the brig in Okinawa, which for layman's terms, that's a warden. So he still lives in Japan, and I'm interested to talk to him about that also. We're going to talk to him about his life and career, and we might even have a little conversation. Him and I have crossed paths with the same notorious inmate, and so we may have a discussion about that also. But I'm really happy to have him on the podcast and excited to hear his take on, corrections in the military. We had Warden Fuel on here one time, and he talked a little bit about the Army, but you were over there on Okinawa and in the Marines, so it should be a little bit different. So welcome to the podcast, Jimmy. Can I call you Jimmy?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah. I start all these interviews the same. I like to learn about people and tell me where you grew up, what that was like, and then for you, it was going in the military. That's how you got in corrections. But was that a choice, or kind of tell me how you got into that?
Okay. Yeah, I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Irish Catholic family. Went to Catholic school up until the 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to public school. Didn't do well in school. If they had the diagnosis of ADHD back in those days, I would have been diagnosed as AD.
Sure.
Never knew that I had it until later on in life. But got in some trouble at school, got thrown out of the Catholic school and high school, and then I was in the public school, and then I went till I was 16 years old, and I quit school. And I was working for the city. Then I said, hey, I'm going nowhere, and decided I wanted to go in the military. Vietnam was still going on, and I was fine with going to Vietnam if I got the orders. So I went down to the recruiter, and I wanted to go into the Seabees. So I went to the Seabee recruiter, and he said, can't take you, you're a high school dropout. And the Marine recruiter happened to be in earshot and said, hey, come on over and talk to me. We'll take you. So I went in back then you could go in on a 2-year contract. So I was 17 and went to Parris Island. First time I ever flew in my life, and arrived at Parris Island, and my whole world was turned upside down. And I learned a lot, found out who was in charge, and it certainly wasn't me, and went through boot camp and graduated boot camp. Then they sent us to Camp Lejeune to advanced infantry training. I was a 0311, a grunt. And we finished the infantry training, and then was able to go home on leave, and then back to Camp Lejeune to 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines, and was deployed to the Mediterranean. We have a battalion of Marines floating around 365 days a year, and we do operations on Crete, Sardinia, and places like that. And you're out there for 6 months, then came back to Camp Lejeune, and then the battalion broke up. Then I got orders to Okinawa. So this was 1971. I'm in Okinawa, and I was with Kilo 3-4 over there, infantry, and loved the island. Loved it so much. I met my wife over there in 1971, and we got married. So I was 19 years old, married my wife. I stayed till 1973, and then got orders for discharge. I went to Treasure Island, and Vietnam was still going on at that time. I had volunteered before I met my wife. When I was in 3-4 in Okinawa, I had volunteered to go to Vietnam, but the first sergeant, when orders came in from the battalion, quotas would come in, and the first sergeant, he'd send the shitbirds down there to Vietnam. So the other Marines he'd keep. You know, he had to fill a quota, and the shitbirds were excuse the terminology, the shitbirds were the ones that got they got the quota. So I didn't get it. But luckily, thank God, and I met my wife and married, and then went back to Treasure Island, was discharged from the Marine Corps, went back to Scranton, and things weren't working out as far as trying to find a job. I tried to get in the state police, that wasn't happening. And I was working for my uncle at a brewery there, delivering beer. And I said, I had it better in the Marine Corps. And thank God that when I did get out, the reserve recruiter came to my house and said to me, why don't you come down to the reserve unit? And I said, no, I've had it. I'm ready. That's it. And he said, no, why don't you just come down? So I went down there, and they said, what do you want to do? It was a Marine Corps transportation squadron. And they said, I said, well, I want to be a truck driver. So they made me a truck driver. I stayed in the reserves for 3 months and said, no, I'm going back on active duty. So I went down to the recruiter and said, I want to go back on active duty. I was a corporal then, and he said, okay, we're going to put you back in the infantry. O3. I said, no, I don't want to go back in the infantry. He said, what do you want to do? So on the recruiter's office, they have this, what they call an MOS chart. That's all the occupational fields that are throughout the Marine Corps.
Sure.
And I looked at the one and I said, I want to be a polygraph operator. Well, the closest I got to the polygraph was the second deck turnkey at the brig at Camp Lejeune. They made me a corrections man. So that's how I got in corrections. I never thought of corrections, never entered in my mind anything about it. So I report to Camp Lejeune, and I'm at the brig at Lejeune. We had 2 brigs, and a brig is a prison, and we had 450 inmates in the brig that I worked at, and then the other brig was probably about a half a mile away from us. We had about 250. We almost had a TO battalion of people locked up because Vietnam was still going on.
Yeah.
And we had some criminals that were locked up. So they put me up on second deck turnkey, and I didn't know shit from Shinola about corrections or anything else. I hadn't even been through pre-service training yet. They just put me, OJT,
Sure.
up there on the second deck turnkey. And I'll share a story with you. This is, I hear you many times when you're talking to people who said, what was your first experience when you went into the walls and so forth? Well, this place was like a zoo, the stuff that was going on. And I remember sitting in that turnkey cage, and the sergeant was bringing prisoners down from administrative segregation. Those were allowed to go down to the chow hall to eat, ASEG. And he was taking them down. And on the way back up, one of them said, you motherfucker, or something like that. And he brought them all back in, and then he came out to me. Now, this guy was a seasoned Marine. He was a sergeant, been to Vietnam. He was a tough son of a gun. And he comes back out to me, and he said, write up a report shit. I didn't hear. He said, write up a report shit. Not it. This is what he said. So I wrote the report shit up, took it into to him, and I said, Sergeant, I said, I didn't hear the guy, so I don't feel good about this and don't want to do that. And he looked at me and he said, how long you been here? I said, 3 days. He said, you're going to be thinking a whole lot different after this, and that was it. And he was right. It took about a month or 2 months, and the mentality I could find myself changing too. It was us against them. That was the mentality that I was getting into, along with the other guards that I worked with and so forth. Then I got promoted to sergeant. I was in charge of a dormitory, had about 70 inmates in that, and worked that, and then worked other security jobs. Then got orders to Okinawa. So in 1974, reported we had two brigs in Okinawa, one for pretrial and the other for the sentenced prisoners. And this is in 1974. And when I got there, I was a dorm supervisor, and I was a senior dorm supervisor. So I was in charge of the other dorm supervisors. We had 4 dormitories. We had probably about 175 prisoners altogether. And I really liked the dorm setup. I liked that you could look down one end, and even the old prison that we're in, even the head area was all completely open. So you could just envision the mess deck was in the middle of the prison, and the 4 dormitories all surrounded it. And you could see from the mess deck, you could see into all of the dormitories. You could see into all of the head areas, the showers, the crappers, and everything else. So there was no blind spots. And it was good. For sanitary purposes, it wasn't, the greatest. Somebody could be on the crapper while you're eating your lunch and so forth. And then I enjoyed that, working the dorms and working with the inmates and stuff. Then the commanding officer. Sure.
Let me ask a question real quick. Just trying to wrap my head around it. So security levels, what are you guys dealing with? I mean, is this dorm, is this like what I would call medium security, or is this high security inmates? Do you have bars and doors somewhere where you're putting the worst of the worst and everybody else is in the dorm? How does that work in military breaks?
Okay, we had SEG. We called it SEG. And in SEG, you had ASEG and you had DSEG. ASEG was administrative segregation. DSEG was disciplinary segregation. So the DSEG, disciplinary segregation, was a closed face, solid, steel door.
Okay.
And all you had was the food tray, and that was it. There was no window or anything else. It was completely, closed face door, and it was hell back there. And so the prisoners, the punishment that they could be given by the commanding officer, they could be given disciplinary segregation, restricted diet. I don't know if the feds had that system or the states. They could put them on a restricted diet, not for health reasons, for disciplinary reasons.
Well, some places do the food loaves, and that's what's restricted food diet. Yeah.
Okay, so we could put them back there for 15 days, disciplinary segregation, and 15 days on that restricted diet.
Mm-hmm.
And then administrative segregation, that's where you kept all, the cats and dogs and stuff. They could be max custody prisoners back there too. The dormitories, pretty much, we had, back then we called, I don't know if you ever used they changed it. We used to use the term close custody.
Yeah.
We had base parolees that were billeted outside the prison. Like we had a small hut where those base parolees lived. And so they could go around the base and so forth, and they worked someplace on the base. Then you had minimum custody. They could move around inside the institution, cleaning up and so forth. Then you had medium custody. They're the ones that we would send outside on working parties under guard, side to do work and stuff. And then we had close custody. Close custody remained inside. Then they had max custody, which were the max custodies were all kept back there in segregation. Interesting enough, later on, we can talk about our prisoner that we had at the Fountain in Common. The commanding officer, beknownst to me, he decided that he was a close custody prisoner, but opted to put him in the dormitory, which was a mistake. And yeah, I had it. He was in my.
Is this after he was sentenced?
Yes. It sure was.
Well, let's go ahead and we'll step into this a little bit since we've talked about it. Let me give a little bit of history. So Clayton Fountain he had went in the Marines. He got mad at his sergeant because the sergeant had apparently written him up for wearing a workout clothes in the mess hall. They got in an argument. So Fountain went, took a pistol apart, slipped it out of the armory, took it over to, they were on the Philippines, I believe, and he stepped
Yes.
out on a place for shore leave where they had that, used the pistol to take a shotgun from a security officer, a Philippine security officer, and then walked up and shot Sergeant Wren. After the military sentenced him, he was kind of, and we'll talk a little bit about what you saw there because I don't know about this part, but they sent him to feds, and he ended up killing 3 more inmates and a federal correctional officer after
Yep.
that. So we kind of refer to him as a prison serial killer because, I mean, he had 5 bodies on him by the time he was passed away. So tell me about Clayton Fountain at that time. I mean, that was fresh. That was, you were right there.
Yeah, he was transferred down to us from the Philippines. He, for pretrial confinement first.
Mm-hmm.
They only kept him in the Philippines for a short period of time, and they transferred him down to us, and we put him back there in the segregation unit, ASEG. He was back there at ASEG, and then the commanding officer had this idea. He was going to put him on mess duty, which was not a good decision, and he put him on mess duty, and now envision you've got the 4 dormitories open where anybody that's on the mess deck can see into all the dormitories. And the mess deck, you had cast iron picnic tables. They're cast iron. These things were about a half an inch thick metal, and they were bolted to the deck. And they were ideal. I mean, you couldn't lift them up even if they weren't bolted to the deck. They were so heavy. So I wasn't on duty as a dorm supervisor. I got off around 22:30. We tucked the prisoners in for the night, and then off we'd go, the dorm supervisors. Well, the next day, I didn't come in until 1400. The next day, I think it was in the morning, Fountain decides he's going to take on some guard. He jumps up on the cast iron picnic table, and he's got the old swabs. You have the metal, and you can, he detached the swab from the metal, and he had the metal, and he had the broom, and he's threatening to kick ass and everything else. Well, they sent in a riot team. They took him down. Back in those days, we still employed non-corrections folks. We had what we call fappers. They were from the infantry. So these guys weren't training corrections or anything else. These guys were just hardcore grunts. Some of them were Vietnam vets and stuff. So they got Fountain down, and they kept twisting the leg. The leg didn't twist anymore, and it broke. So they had to take him down to the hospital. They had to cast him up. So the next day I came on at 1400, and I'm in the dorm, and then the duty warden, he came and he said, we need your help in SEG. I said, what's up? He said, Fountain, he's tearing up the cast, and we damn sure don't want to take him back down to that hospital again. So we had to go back there, put him in a 4 restraint. Back then you could do that. Put him in a 4 restraint, and just tied him down. He ended up back in the dormitory again. I had him. He was one of the best workers I had. I mean, as far as like I'd put him in that head to clean and everything else, and he worked well, but he just had this way about him, the temper, and just extremely dangerous. So he did about 9 months with us. Then when he was sentenced, we transferred him back to Leavenworth. And while he was at Leavenworth, that's the military prison. The United States, they call it the United States Disciplinary Barracks. We transferred him back there, and then he worked himself, I think, in the medium custody or something. And he made a homemade shank, and he had put it to an Army guard's throat. It was going to kill him unless he gave him access to the rotunda house there that controlled all the movement of the tiers and stuff. And they kept weapons in there. He got a weapon. He started shooting the place. One guard lost his eye. Then they had a sniper team come in, and they had the infrared dot, and Fountain saw the dot on him, and he surrendered.
Right.
And that's when they went out to the feds and said, hey, look, this guy's a bad actor. Would you take him off our hands? And the feds were very kind enough to take him, and they transferred him to Leavenworth Federal Prison, and that's when he tied in with the Aryan Brotherhood, and he tied in with Silverstein.
Yep.
They became bosom buddies, and then years went by, and I lost touch what was going on with him. But then it's probably about I was Camp Lejeune. I was the brig officer back there, like a deputy warden, and some big shot from the Federal Bureau of Prison. He was a reservist. His name was, I think, Turner, Cecil Turner. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, he was the warden. Marion was one of the places he was warden, which is the
Oh, okay,
supermax.
okay,
Yeah, so
okay. So he came in 80, that would have been probably 85. He came to Camp Lejeune to do his two weeks reserve duty. So my boss, the commanding officer, he went on leave, and Turner took the place over. And we got talking, and he just, I don't know how we got talking about Fountain. He said, "Oh, you knew Fountain?" I says, "Yeah, I had him when he was first locked up." And then he said, "Well, let me tell you what he's done. He's progressed." And he told me about, what had happened at Marion. And he said that, in fact, he was one of the ones that did the investigation. And he said they transferred him out of there as quick as they could for fear the guards were going to kill him, because of him and Silverstein. And then I guess he was transferred into the medical facility. I think maybe that's where you picked him up.
They built a cell at the Federal Medical Center. Him and Silverstein killed two officers, Robert Hoffman and Merle Klutz, and they did it on the same day. Silverstein got out first, had somebody uncuff him and pass a shank through the bars, and then he stabbed. Silverstein killed. So, and a few hours later, they came up off lockdown, and Fountain did the same thing and got a shank from another guy, and then stabbed Robert Hoffman. So we lost two federal officers within a few hours at Marion.
Yep.
And so they ended up building a cell at Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri for Fountain, and then they built a special cell at Leavenworth for Silverstein. But Fountain, and everybody forgets about this, I mean, Klutz was Hoffman was his fifth murder, not even including the officer he shot in the eye at USDB and all the people that were hurt up till then. That was his fifth murder, and they just kept tacking, oh, well, there's another life sentence. There's another, and nobody ever dealt with it. I have a little bit of a heartache over the whole Fountain story because I watched it at the end when he was being paraded around and being loved on by, sorry if I get a little wound up, but I got to watch that monk that wrote the book come in there, and got to watch bigwigs come in there and treat him like he was a celebrity. And to me, he's just a 5-time murderer, but that's interesting. But yeah, that's where I ran into him, was the medical center. That's where he died in 2004 or 5 or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was then. Mike, let me ask you a question with that. I read the book. Did he make those changes according to the book toward the end? They said that he had no infractions or anything. Did he? Because I was shocked. I was shocked when I read. That he was soliciting for money to work on his doctorate's degree in theology or something. I said, what the hell's going on?
Yeah, they paid for his college. They would come in and visit him. You got to take a look. At this point, he's older, and they're treating him like a celebrity. So if he did have, and it was only minor infractions, he wasn't we did not touch him. You had to slide a door to get to the door to put his tray in a box, So there was no way for him to actually get to staff. To go to rec, we had to roll another door that would let him over there and close it behind him. So there was never staff touching him. So he didn't have the opportunities. And for minor infractions that he did, they'd sweep that stuff under the rug. Well, we don't want to get him upset. And so, yeah, he didn't get write-ups. He didn't get stuff. But I used to have I won't name him, but I used to have an AW, a warden, who thought he was a psychologist, who would come back there and order me to break security protocols by putting a chair and opening both those tray slots so that he can sit there and have lunch with Fountain and talk to him.
I read that in the book.
Just the most irritating thing I've ever done in my life, to treat him like that. Nobody here, and I'm going to go off a little bit, but where were these monks? Nobody went and took care of the families, of the officers or even the inmates. It wasn't Fountain's place to decide whether or not it was time for those 3 inmates to die. I don't know, what type of inmates they were, but that's not his place. And then what about Sergeant Wren's family? They never did anything for those people, but they were in there passing money and paying for college and making a big deal out of him. It was kind of sick to watch there.
Were you there when he passed?
I was working there. Yeah, he
When he
died of a
passed?
heart attack. Unfortunately, he died of a heart attack quietly in his cell. They were doing rounds, and he was dead.
I had heard that back to Marion with that. This is a good point, and I saw this in corrections, and I'm sure you did too. A complacency where guards sometimes, they start to just take things for granted and they stop being inquisitive and so forth. I had heard that they had at Marion they had the sally port in front of every cell. So in other words, 2 cells, the cell, and then there was a sally port cell in front of it, then the cell next to it, and then a sally port in front of it. I heard that they had kind of gotten complacent and left the sally port cells open so they can get in and out a lot faster.
It was rep time. You're moving bunches of inmates, so you just open them all up so that you can get in there and you don't have to, take as much time. And you've seen it,
Yeah.
I've seen it,
Oh yeah.
where
Oh yeah.
staff are
Oh yeah.
taking shortcuts.
Oh yeah. Yep.
That complacency is always what gets us in trouble. If we're doing our jobs and we're doing it at the level that we can, rarely do people get hurt because we've got the security in place. We've got hundreds of years of policy and post orders that have been based on problems or things that went wrong, and we learn from. So if we follow those post orders, if we follow those policies, rarely do we have problems. But we all know about complacency.
Oh yeah, that's and I'm as guilty too. At times,
We've all done it.
I have to remind myself too to don't take things for granted. Just start questioning again. Start questioning again. Start looking and stuff.
Yeah.
I would tell the guards. I would say to them, "Hey, listen. You think your post that you're on, whatever it is just it's a know nothing post and it's not important and all that. Let me tell you something. If an inmate escapes through your post now has become the most important damn thing in there. So don't take your job in corrections for granted. Any job where you're working there, it's an important position that you're in."
So let's go back. I mean, I hate to get off there. That's just kind of my pet peeve. So
No, it's interesting because there's not many people that knew him or had contact with him, but he was a dangerous individual.
he was an
Dangerous.
asshole when I knew him. I mean, he wasn't like Mr. Nice Guy,
Oh no.
He was smiling when they'd come visit him, and then when he'd leave, he was calling us every name in the book. So, yeah. And he got fatter. That's one more thing. I'll kind of say this, and I don't know if it's kosher or not, but there's going to be people that know what I'm talking about. He put on a lot of weight. And when I got to Springfield, I heard some of the old guards say that they were giving him extra trays. And I'm like, what the hell are you giving him extra trays? Well, if he's fat, he won't fight as much. And that was kind of the thought. So they wanted to keep him fattened up so he wasn't, because he used to be in really good shape. He exercised, and when he was doing all that killing, he was in great shape. And so that was kind of their way of, here, give him an extra tray, let him fatten up. And he was pretty good sized.
That's something real quick. I I know some of my fellow people that I work with in corrections, they'll take a stance to this because they were big weightlifters themselves. But when I took over that prison in Okinawa, at first, I got rid of all the weights. I said, the hell with them. They're not going to have the weights because they're going to get stronger. They're going to bulk up. They're going to intimidate. They're going to bulk up. So I don't know why we allow them to have the weights.
Yeah.
I can understand cardio things and stuff like that there, but not those damn weights where they can bulk up and they can become like monsters.
Yeah. Feds got rid of it. I can tell you exactly what year. But we had enough people killed with a 50-pound weight on the yard that finally they pulled the weights off the yard, the loose weights. But when I walked into Missouri State Pen the first time, there was a weight pile that was just amazing. There were giants. of inmates that lived on that white pile. Biggest men I've ever seen, And luckily, they wouldn't get in trouble because they were so busy trying to steal enough protein or pay somebody to steal enough protein out of the kitchen and work out that they would stay out of trouble so that they wouldn't lose, their food or their privileges. But every once in a while there'd be a fight and somebody would take a 45-pound weight and crush somebody, and finally pretty much everybody I think's gotten rid of those. I think.
That's good.
Yeah. So yeah, crazy stuff.
Well, back to where
Sure.
when I went to Okinawa and I was working the dorms, then the commanding officer decided, okay, Cummings, I want to make you a consular. Well, I didn't want to be a consular, but I had no choice. He says, Cummings, you're going to be a consular. So made me a consular, and then I was working, at a caseload of about 40 inmates and stuff, and didn't care for it. And then said, no, I want to go back. I want to go back to security. So went back to security, and I always the people that would hold the disciplinary boards or the punishment, the CO, sometimes I just didn't feel we were getting the backing by them. You'd write up a report sheet and so forth, and they'd get a slap on the hand, or they just weren't getting the punishment that they really deserve, which, that's a tool for us, if they when they screw up and with the report, if you do put them on report, but they were, I don't want to say they were trying to be good guys with the inmates, but they didn't get the punishment that they should have gotten. And I said to myself, by God, if I ever get in the position of being in charge and everything else, by God, I'm gonna back those guards up.
So tell me a little bit about, because I think people don't understand, when military inmates are in military prison, they're still under the military code of justice. They still are under
Sure are.
everything. And so
Yep.
military prisons are ran a little bit different. Do you feel like you have more control?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because military inmates, I mean, I respect you guys immensely. Just the people that we dealt with there is nothing in comparison to what your experiences are and the people that you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
We just get a little tiny bit of that. But these people in the military, they have some form of discipline, even though they're bad and so forth. There's still some form of discipline, so you can run the institutions more stricter.
Okay.
And that's something that I believed in. We have a. I heard you talking to the warden. It was yesterday, I think, from Kentucky.
Yeah.
He was in Ohio. He had Park. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
I would love to meet that guy. I just like the way he operated.
Yeah. He's a really nice guy. So let me ask you. Oh, go ahead.
Sure. Go ahead.
Let me ask a dumb question because I don't know the answer to this. So if you get in trouble with military justice, are you automatically getting a discharge? Or did you hold guys who had the opportunity to do a certain amount of time, low level stuff even, and still go back into the service or stay in the service? Was that an option, or is it always a dishonorable or a discharge?
No. They, depending on what the court was, like if they went to we had 3 courts in the military justice system. You had a summary court martial, and a summary court martial is a very minor court martial where they could give you up to 30 days in the brig, but there's no discharge attached to it or anything.
Okay.
So you can go back to active duty. Then the next court martial you have is a special court martial. That's where they can give you a max of up to 6 months confinement. Back then, they could give you up to 6 months confinement, and they could give you a bad conduct discharge, BCD. And if you got a BCD, that was it. You were gonna after you did your time, you were gonna get out. You're gonna be sent home. And the last court martial you've got is a dishonorable discharge, and that's where they can go all the way up to the death sentence.
Okay.
With the dishonorable discharge. But to answer your question, yes, we did. Back in those days, we did have prisoners that were going back to duty, even if they got a bad conduct discharge. That's where we started. We started in corrections. It was called restoration. This is for prisoners that were going back to duty, and that I did that at Camp Lejeune. I ran that when I was enlisted. I was a staff sergeant, and I was in charge of that particular program. And that's kind of like a semi boot camp. We kept them in there for about 3 weeks. I had my own dormitory with about maybe 30 of them in there, and I'd take them out of the brig. We did training, Marine Corps training, run the hell out of them, and all kinds of military things like that. And if they did well in there, then that report would be forwarded back to their battalion commander, and he could suspend even a bad conduct discharge. He could suspend it, and they could go back to active duty. That was back then.
Yeah.
But Mike, these days, no.
Yeah.
Everybody, they're out. After they've finished their time. They don't give them a second chance these days.
I just wonder because it seems like they would be harder to control because they've had, not only are they in jail or the brig, but they've had everything taken away from them. They're going to lose their status. Yeah. They're going to lose and I think that type of inmate would be harder to control.
Oh, they are. We had in Okinawa, when I was the commanding officer there, we could house them for up to a year.
Okay.
If they received a sentence of a year or less, I could house them for up to a year. Beyond a year, we transferred them back to Camp Lejeune and Camp Pendleton, where they housed them for up to 5 years. And then beyond 5 years, back then, we would transfer them to Leavenworth, where they could spend the rest of their life at Leavenworth. But a lot of our inmates, even at Leavenworth, were still, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but they wanted to go to the federal prison. A lot of them did, because they could get out quicker.
Yeah.
In the federal prison system than they could in the military system. We had a system back then which was really bad, where if you went to your court martial and you received, let's say you received 6 months confinement and a bad conduct discharge. Well, in military corrections, if the sentence was under a year, they got 5 days good conduct time for every month. Feds work that way.
Yeah.
They got 5 days. So when you computed their release date, you'd commute that in there. If they got a year sentence, 5, it'd be 60 days. So their minimum release date would be it's a practice 60 days from their military sentence. But that's another thing you could do as the commanding officer. If they screwed around and everything else, boom, you could take that good conduct time away from them.
Right.
So they'll spend longer in there. They won't get out early. So that's another tool that you could use. But the system back then wasn't good, because if the person received the bad conduct discharge, you couldn't transfer them back home. I mean, they get released from the brig, and they'd be waiting around the unit until they could transfer them back home, because they couldn't transfer them until they took final action on their discharge. And as a result, you'd have a guy that was forfeiture of all pay and allowances. He doesn't have a penny in his pocket. Now he's hanging around the base on restriction with no money, and they'd reoffend. Camp Lejeune, for example, this is a good story. There was this prisoner, his name was Priest. And Priest was really one of the dumbest prisoners that I think I've ever encountered. He should have been selling insurance or something. He just didn't have it to be a criminal. So Priest, he breaks into the PX at Camp Lejeune through the air conditioning duct. He drops his ID card in the air conditioning system, and then takes off with the goods and all that stuff. But the ID card's there. So when the investigators went in, they found the ID card. So he comes into the brig, goes to court, receives like a 4-month sentence. So he's sentenced to 4 months. Bad conduct discharge. Same system. He gets released. He's hanging around, no money. Well, him and his buddy, they get drunk. They go down to the marina on the base. They steal a boat, and they're trying to go to Cuba. And they ran the boat up on a sand dune. The police caught him, and they brought them back to the brig to lock him up in pretrial confinement. So comes back, receiving a release, commanding officer. He was a lieutenant colonel, and tough guy, but a good man. And Priest comes in, and Colonel says to him, "Do you know who I am?" He said, "Yes, sir. You're the commanding officer," because he'd been in the brig before. "You're the commanding officer of the brig." He goes, "You're right." And he says, Do you know whose boat that was that you stole? He said, no, sir. He said, it was mine. This guy was a loser, man.
Just worse luck.
Bad luck. And then he had another inmate, because we had the two prisons. So this one inmate gets out through the mess deck and he jumps in a dipsy dumpster. You know what dipsy dumpster is? The dipsy dumpster is those big metal things that they throw garbage in and everything. Big, enormous garbage can, with thick metal and stuff. And they have to use a special dump truck that comes down. It's got like a forklift and it lifts the dipsy dumpster up and dumps it into the garbage truck. So this inmate, he gets in the dipsy dumpster because he knows the guy's gonna come. He's in the dipsy dumpster, so the garbage truck comes in, it puts the forks in, lifts it up, dumps it in there, and now the guy that's driving the garbage truck, he pushes the button to compress it. Now this guy's in the back there, right? And he's compressing. He's lucky he didn't compress it all the way, but he's crushed in there with all the garbage. So he leaves the gate, the compound, but what does he do? The garbage truck goes to the other brig, pulls into the compound. By the time this inmate works his way through the garbage to get out, he jumps out and he starts running to find out that he's in the compound of the other prison.
It's a lifetime of stories there.
Oh, there's stories. Well, you too. You got some stories. So anyway, I went to. God no. And then I was running what they call that restoration, where prisoners, they're going back to duty. And I was a staff sergeant, and this captain that I worked for, he said, I'm putting you in for warrant officer. I said, sir, I don't want to be a warrant officer. I like what I'm doing. No, he said, I'm going to put you in for it. I said, okay. So he put me in for it. And I didn't get picked up, but I didn't care because I really didn't care. I loved what I was doing. I really enjoyed it. So the following year, he said, I'm putting you in for it again. I said, sir, and he said, I'm putting you in for it. So he put me in for it. And this gunny and I, we said, hey, we need to get out of the brig. Let's go to the drill field. So we both volunteered to go to the drill field. And the gunny's orders came in, and I wanted to be in the same class with him. And I called my monitor, which is up in Washington, and I said, hey, where are my orders for the drill field? He said, I can't touch your book right now because it's at the warrant officer board. I said, when does the board get out? He said, in a week. I said, well, as soon as it gets out, cut me the orders. He said, okay. The board got out and I got picked up for warrant officer, so that canked that. So I went to Quantico, Virginia, to the warrant officer school, officer training course down there, and finished that. And then they gave me orders to the brig in Okinawa, which was ideal. My wife's from here, and came to Okinawa in 1979, and I was at the brig for about a month, and this full bird colonel said to me, he had an Irish brogue, he puts his arm around me and he goes, oh, Mr. Cummings, how would you like to be the officer in charge of correctional custody? Now, correctional custody is something that the state, I don't know if the feds ever went to, it was shock incarceration. Did you ever see that program?
Yeah.
Okay. So correctional custody is basically that. It's shock incarceration. So if a Marine goes to non-judicial punishment, it's a minor punishment, not court-martial system or anything like that. A non-judicial punishment, the commanding officer can give him up to 30 days correctional custody. And he goes through like a boot camp. It's hell for 30 days. So this colonel wraps his arm around me and he says to me, Mr. Cummings, how would you like to be the OIC of correctional custody? I said, sir, I want to be the brig officer. He said, no, Mr. Cummings, you're going to be the OIC of correctional custody. I said, okay, sir. He said, don't put your hands on them and don't let your staff put your hands on them. I said, no, sir, I won't. So I'm up there about a week and the place is out of control. The captain that is not a corrections guy that had it, he was an alcoholic, and all he would do for the whole year that he was there, he'd have the driver take him down to the airport on the base and just watch the planes, come and go. He couldn't wait to get back to the States. So I took it over, and the place was just out of control. They were doing stuff there that, somebody was going to jail. And I remember the words of the colonel, and my senior enlisted guy that they assigned me was 55 years old. He made the landing of Okinawa at 17 years old. Walter Balabas, he was a gunnery sergeant, made the landing. I was 28 years old. This guy made the landing of Okinawa. So he's my staff NCOIC, and I'm into the program a week, and I get a call from my duty, and he says, "Sir, one of them jumped the fence last night." I said, "What happened?" And he told me, and I said, "No, something's up, you know." So I went in with the gunny, and we're questioning them, and they said, he just took his cartridge belt off and just jumped over the fence. And I'm thinking, bullshit. And then I get a call from the investigators. They're saying, I was a warrant officer then. Warrant officer, you're going to have to bring these corporals down there. Your awardee, we call them awardees. Your awardee turned himself into us down here, and he's been assaulted and so forth. I said, "Oh shit, that's not good. This is not good." But anyway, thank God we came through it, and those guys that had done that, I got rid of them as quick as possible, and moved them along. They weren't suited for corrections. So I had that program for 5 years. It's a good program. I mean, you can really turn Marines' lives around. In fact, it was such a good program that the Navy, the ships out at sea, they heard about it. They would literally, the captain of the ship would sentence the guy to 30-day CC. They'd bring the ship into Okinawa only for the purpose of dropping the guy off. And then 30 days later, they'd come back and they'd pick him up. He got like a little Marine back. Yeah. It was a good program.
That was a shock for a Navy guy to get dropped off in a Marine.
Oh yeah, yeah. That was a shock and a half, and it was really a shock for the unit. Like when the Navy, they got him back, and they just couldn't believe it. He was like a Marine. He was, yes sir, no sir, and he was doing, it was a good, Mike. It was a good program. And then the last year, they made me the CO of the brig that that Fountain was in. They made me the CO, and then I picked up captain, went back to Camp Lejeune as the brig officer. That'd be like the deputy warden, and had that for about had that for about a year. And then the general, they wanted to start a correctional custody program at Camp Lejeune. So they knew that I had the experience of running the one over there, so they had me set it up from scratch with the great staff that I had. And and then after that, I went back to be the brig officer back there. Then luckily, I got a call from our op field sponsor, which was a lieutenant colonel corrections guy. And he had told me he was going to leave me alone and let me stay at Lejeune. But then he said, "Jim, we're going to have to move you to Pendleton. They're having some problems out there." And I said, "Sir, you told me you're going to leave me alone. And you kept telling me to chill out, chill out, chill out." And I said, "Now you want to bring the junkyard dog out and you want me to go out there to Pendleton." He says, "Either you're going to Pendleton or you're going to Leavenworth. Which one do you want to go to?" I said, "Well, I damn sure didn't want to go to Leavenworth, out there with the Army and stuff." And all the years that I've been in corrections, it'd be like old home week seeing those inmates that are out there. So I said, "All right, I'll go to Pendleton." And luckily enough, the commanding officer over here in Okinawa, he had got passed over promotion. So I came over to take over for him. And when I got here, he had 3 internal escapes on his 3-year duty there. And you'll find this interesting. The way the place was designed, they could have designed it as a max facility if they wanted to, but the CO at that time, he designed it like a minimum security facility. There was very few bars on any of the windows, or it was a nightmare. My predecessor, he had 3 internal escapes, and some of it was due to complacency, some of it was due to the locking system just wasn't strong enough. So I briefed the general, and I told him, I said, "Colonel, I can't guarantee I'm going to have I need bars. I need more bars." So this colonel, he was a 2-star general, and he was a tough guy, and he said, "All right." And millions and millions of dollars, Mike, maintenance came to have you ever seen bars prefab when they make them from scratch? Holy God, that's quite they were there for 6 months.
Yeah.
Months of doing nothing but that. Those bars, we to move the project along, we send inmates in there to work with them too. It was so labor intensive, but finally got the whole place barred up, and I never had an escape on my watch in the 5 years that I had it. And then as the CO of the brig in Okinawa, I worked very closely with the Japanese prison system. So I I would meet with the warden of the Japanese prison once a month, and we would talk about the incarcerated, what they call sofa status prisoners. So, have you ever heard the term before, sofa status? It's an abbreviation for Status of Forces Agreement. So, it's an agreement between the host nation and the military. They call it SOFA. So when a military person comes to Okinawa or his family comes to Okinawa, in their passport, they stamp it with a SOFA stamp. That's their visa to be in Japan. So if a person was a SOFA status person when they committed a crime, the Japanese have the first go-so on crimes, even on base. So if you had a murder on base or a rape or something serious, the Japanese are the first. They have the first go. Or they can say, all right, we're kicking them back to you, but you've got to guarantee that they'll be at court on such and such a date. Well, most commanders, they'll lock them up. Put them in our brig. This is a nice thing that a commander can do. He doesn't have to have a charge or anything else. He just puts in there under status of forces agreement with the host nation, or I forget exactly what the words he puts in there, but there's no magistrate hearing. So he could keep that guy could be locked up for 6 months until his Japanese court, and the courts take a long time in Japan to go. So I would go down once a month and we'd have a meeting. And then I would go through the prison with the warden and I'd go back there and see those inmates. And so it was established a good relationship with different wardens. They have a great system, the Japanese. They have a great system.
Is very controlled.
Very controlled.
Their culture seems very controlled in what they do. The prison's the same way, huh?
Mike, absolutely. In fact, if you ever come over here to visit me, I'll take you down there and I'll show you some of their facilities. There's two.
Love to.
And they literally, it is so controlled. But the nice thing about a Japanese prison, it's a little bit, they're very controlled. Like, I'll give you an example. They can only, in 1 week, they can only write a letter, 1 or 2 letters, and they can only have 3 pieces of paper. Okay? Now, if the paper is 2 inches by 2 inches, that's 1 piece of paper. If the paper is 12 inches by 24 inches, that's 1 piece of paper. So the prisoners, I'd go down there, and this one prisoner, he was a dirtbag. He said, "Hey, Captain, we appreciate that you're getting papers down here, but can you give us a little bit bigger papers?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, sir, the notebooks that you're giving us are only this big, And he said that 1 page counts as 1 page. That's it. Can you give us bigger notebooks?" And they're very restricted with their food. They eat based on the work job they have.
How many calories
So
they need.
Exactly, everybody doesn't get the same. If you're pre-trial, your calories are reduced because you're not leaving your cell.
Right.
If you're a sentenced prisoner, if you're working in the mess hall, you get so many calories. If you're working outside, you get so many calories. And they got it down to a gnat's butt. They flat and the warden in the Japanese prison, he has to go down and sample every meal. And when you go through there in the chow hall, they have to keep for 3 days the meal that was served, refrigerated container.
Yeah.
The meal that was served for those 3 days.
That's interesting.
They have to sit and they have to look at the wall. They can't, like their cell blocks, they have, what do you call it, like a flip thing that goes down like that.
Yeah.
So you can't be sticking your hand out there, "Hey, guard," or anything else. Perfect silence. There's no talking. So you flip that switch, lever comes down. So when a guard sees that, he'll come down. "What do you need?" And that's it. It's very controlling, very strict. But it's a safe environment where an inmate can do their time. They don't have to worry about, if they follow the rules, they don't have to worry about being beaten up. They don't have to worry about being raped by another inmate or intimidated by another inmate. It's a safe if I had to do my time, I'd do it in a Japanese prison in a heartbeat. I've always felt strong about this. We that are in the business, We cannot guarantee a safe environment for the inmates that we have in there. We cannot. We cannot. And I say, society, I've had, people tell me this, lock them some bitches up, they shouldn't get anything and all that. And I said, let me tell you something. They still have to be treated, as human beings. I said, let's say a young offender comes in. He got caught smoking marijuana or selling marijuana, and he gets a year sentence. Okay, he comes in. Now, he's been sentenced, got a year, comes in. He's being intimidated by other inmates, possibly beaten up, or worse, he could be raped. Now, when this guy gets out, he's pissed at society. He's saying, "Hey, you sentenced me into this place. I've been victimized, tortured, and everything else in here." I said we should be able to provide a safe environment, for them and for our staff. But because of the budget, we don't get enough money. We don't have enough programs. There's just not enough money. More needs to be done in the correction system.
And I've watched it. A lot of that is it just snowballs for them, because you'll see, and I've seen it. I worked in some pretty rough prisons. You get these inmates who come in with a small charge. They've got light at the end of the tunnel, but by the time they get caught up in what's going on, or being threatened, or being raped, or whatever, maybe defending themselves, maybe killing somebody, and now you've got this snowball where this guy's going to spend his entire life in prison. So, there was no chance for them to do better and get out and change. Now they're trapped in that. So, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about there.
And that's what I would tell. When I was giving presentations on the correctional custody system, I'd go around to different units and explain to them, this correctional custody is a good program. It's a punishment authority that you as the commanding officer have available to you to send somebody, but don't send somebody that you feel is not salvageable. I said, because it's not going to do any good. If you feel the guy's salvageable and everything else, give them that punishment. Send them, and we can do something with them. Don't just send them because you want to get a pound of flesh.
So, a question that popped up in my head. A Marine. What do you call a Marine that works in the brig? Is it a correctional officer? Is it a guard? What do you guys refer to them as?
The manual, as far as the occupational field, it says correction specialist.
Okay.
That's what remember I told you that MOS chart, and I said, I want to be a polygraph operator.
Right.
Okay. So you'd have 5831 correction specialist, 5832 corrections counselor,
Okay.
5804 corrections officer. That's what I was. I was a corrections officer.
Okay.
So we call them correction specialists, but no, nobody. They still, hey, you're on guard duty. You're working seg. You're working the dorms. You're going to be a dorm supervisor. You're going to be a duty warden. Names like that. But it was interesting.
The inmates yell, "Hey, guard," or do they ACO, or
no? Yep. Rank.
Okay.
Rank. Yeah, they call them by their rank.
Okay, my fault on that.
Prisoners are called prisoners. Prisoners are called prisoners if they've been sentenced, and if they're pretrial, they're called detainees.
Okay.
So prisoners if they've been sentenced, and I think, let's see, when I was on, not before I retired, maybe a few years before I retired, we used to keep them in their military uniform. And then that was nice. We got rid of that. Now we've got orange for sentenced prisoners and blue for pretrial.
Okay. I worked with a lot of the guys that worked at the DB. When they retired, they would come over and do another 20 at Leavenworth, the federal prison. So I don't even know. I bet it's probably a quarter or a third of our staff over there at one time had come from the military into the federal system there.
Did you work Leavenworth too?
Not the DB. I worked Leavenworth USP.
No, not the DB.
For the feds. Yep.
You did?
Yep.
Whoa, wow.
That's where I started
Hot
feds
house.
at. Yeah.
Yeah, Hot House. I read that book.
Yeah. But they used to tell me they did use of forces to give a guy a shave. He wasn't allowed to grow out a beard. So if they were doing that kind of stuff, they'd put a team together and shave him, or haircuts and stuff. So it was kind of interesting to hear those stories from that other side. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's true. That's true. And force feeding them too. We used to force feed them, and we used to use back then. We were using the 4-point restraint. Put them on that metal rack, and we tied down, with handcuffs and stuff, the legs and the arms.
We still have it in policy. I think most people are moving into this restraint chair, but we still have it in policy where you can do a 4-point restraint. I did a lot of it at the Federal Medical Center because we had inmates who would injure themselves. And that's the only way we could stop them from chew holes in their arms and everything you can imagine at the medical center because we had all the mental health. Yeah.
It reminds me of a funny story. I had this one inmate back at Camp Lejeune. He was in disciplinary segregation, and he had taken his feces and he had formed stars on them, and he put them on his shoulder, right? And he's stark naked. He's got the stars on his shoulders like this here, and the captain to do his security check, and he comes. And he opens up the door, and there's the inmate right there. And he says to the captain, "Salute me! Stand at attention!"
Wow.
And then another one, I remember the gunny's doing count. He's going down through the cell block, and he's got the hand going out like 1, 2, 3, and he gets to the one, and the guy's standing stark naked inside the shitter, at attention in the shitter, stark naked at attention. I mean, you got the stories. You know some of these guys, some of the stuff they do.
Yeah. We sounds like we walked a lot of the same area, even though we weren't at the same place.
No. But you to a more dangerous degree. We didn't have what you had.
Yeah.
We had small tippings of those like that, but you were dealing with the worst of the worst. Then let's see what the heck. Then with the Japanese prison system, I'd go up to mainland Japan, and this one warden, his name was Myojin-san. This guy from the old school. Their Alcatraz was Aba City up in Hokkaido. That was their Alcatraz. It was, and back in those days, this guy Myojin, that was the warden of the prison here in Okinawa, he was telling me that as a kid he grew up in that prison. His father was a guard, and they lived right there in the compound. And he said he used to play with the prisoners and stuff when he was a kid. And Hokkaido it's cold. It's really cold up there.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big complaints with the Americans that we'd have locked up in the Japanese prison system is it was cold in the winter and hotter than hell in the summer. They didn't give them. There's no air conditioning, anything like that there, and so that condition, that part wasn't good. But as far as safe wise, they're safe. But they I forgot where I was going with this. So I went up to mainland Japan, and I saw this Myojin-san. He took me to this famous place that sold, what do they call, tempura? Tempura? Tempura is like deep fried. Okay, tempura. Sure. So he took me to this tempura place in Tokyo where all corrections guys go. So it was this old, like, antique place. So I'm in there. We're shooting the bologna with some of these other Japanese. And I told him, I said, Myojin-san, I want to see Fuchu Prison. That's their big one in Tokyo, Fuchu Prison. He says, come in-san. Oh. He said, Yokohama. He's my friend, the warden at Yokohama. This was a Japanese holiday. I went there. So he had called him and told him that I was coming with another Japanese person and another person. So we went there on his Japanese holiday, and this guy, obviously Myojin was very strong, before he retired. And, this guy was there with his suit on and everything else. It took me through the whole prison up there, and they make soap. I think they had 3,000 inmates and stuff, and they had railroad tracks, like literally, seriously, they had railroad tracks where they make this stuff and move it along areas. 3,000. It was an interesting, clean as a whistle and old as hell. It must have been at least 150 years old. The deck was the administrative area, everything else was all that old Japanese wood that was shining like a baby's rear end. They just beautiful. Yeah.
Can I get you back on here sometime? Can we have another conversation?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, I'd love to do that too and hear more about this. And before I forget, I want to say thank you for your service. I appreciate what you've done and being in the Marines, being a Marine. I know that my father was a Marine, and he was actually on Okinawa.
When was your dad on Okinawa?
That would have been 62 through 64. Yeah.
Oh no, I didn't get here till 70. No, 71.
But
71.
he might have saw the brig, from what I understand. I think there was
Oh
a
yeah,
bar
Mac
fight.
T was there.
I think there was a bar fight, and he got in a little
What
bit of
was
trouble.
what was your dad? What was your dad's MOS? What field was he in?
It was
Was he infantry?
communications. That's all I know.
Oh, he was a comm guy. I used to get a lot of comm guys. Those guys, not your father, but those comm guys, man, they were into the drugs. Those guys were into the drugs. The comm guys, they're too damn smart.
I think they had a good weekend at a bar, and there was a big fight, and so I think he got in trouble for a weekend, but it was
Is
a
your dad still
story.
alive?
Oh, he passed away a few years ago. So yeah,
An invite if you ever want to come over to Okinawa, I'll show you a good time.
oh, I'd love to. Yeah, we'll talk about that. But I'd love to have you back on here. You're a great guest and wonderful stories, and I want to hear some more of them.
I'm enjoying so much just for your audience there. The whole reason that I'm on here is because I listen to Mike's Not All Prisoners Are Equal talk about the justification for putting people in seg and keeping them in seg for extended periods of time and so forth. And I was just blown away by that. Just so practical. You nailed it. You nailed it. Every lawyer and those characters that are on city councils, they're trying to take that away from us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Is there would you like to leave an email, or do you have social media where if somebody wanted to contact you, are you on LinkedIn or anything? I didn't ask.
Yeah, they could contact me on Facebook.
Okay.
Facebook, Jimmy Cummings.
I'll get that information and I'll put it in the show notes.
Sure, Jimmy Cummings, or you can give my email address. I don't care.
Okay. Yep. I know sometimes people like to follow up with the guests, so yeah.
But in part 2, we can talk about my new life now.
I would love to. I would love to hear about.
They'll be shocked to say, "Whoa, boy, this guy made a real change in careers."
Absolutely. So, thank you so much, Jimmy. I appreciate you coming on.
Okay, Mike, it was a pleasure meeting you. Thank you for having me too.
Have a great day.
Hey, Semper Fi, bro.
Hey, before we go, I'd like to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors. Omni Real-Time Locating System is a company I've been working closely with for years. I'm proud to be a part of this innovative team that's developed the best real-time locating system on the market today for your jail or prison. Omni's PREA-compliant real-time monitoring technology is the very best way to track and record your inmates' locations, their movements, their interactions throughout every square inch of your correctional facility. Imagine getting an alarm the second an escape happens, or an alert that lets you know when an inmate's heart rate drops below a set level. To learn more about Omni, go to www.omnirtls.com. That's omnirtls.com. Or you can click on today's show notes to get in the information guide. Omni Real-Time Locating System is a powerful tool specifically designed for the modern correctional professional. If you haven't done so, please take a moment to like my podcast, or better yet, hit the subscribe button so that you'll be notified when the next episode comes out. Thanks for listening, and let's be safe out there.